What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to FudgeMuppet. My name is Scott, here with Michael and Drew. As always, this is the Elder Scrolls podcast, and today we are talking all about the Mages Guild. The Guild of Mages.
The most interesting guild of them all. Well, I will say this, it's a guild that everybody takes for granted, but things with magic were not always so accessible. You know, I think everyone just doesn't appreciate just how good it is that you can walk into a city and there's your fighters guild and a mages guild, and magic is this thing that's open to the public. You can buy spells, you can learn about different schools of magic, and the mages guild, they're also involved with alchemy often. Like, you can learn alchemy from them and buy different ingredients or poisons or potions. But things were not always so accessible. Magic used to be a thing for the few, for the elite. Until one man who we'll talk a lot about, Vanus Galerion, decided to change that. But I guess we'll take things all the way back to the beginning with the Sijic.
Well, to start with, like, the first era kind of stuff, you often find, like, because I don't want people to misinterpret it, because obviously in the first era there's lots of cool magic around. You have the Aelids with their starlight magic and all of their innovations, and you have the Sijic Order, and you have, you know, Chimeri Mystics and the Dwemer, and there's plenty of magic around, but it's the way that it's used or accessed. It's usually like group exclusive or culture or class exclusive. It's not like this. A good way to think about the Mages Guild implementation in the second era is it's kind of like a commodification and a sort of like academic structure of magic. You can now go to a Mages Guild place and you can buy enchanted goods or spells, or you can, you know, enlist with the Mages Guild and you know, have access to scholarly resources about it and get, you know, official teachers and academics and stuff. So it's sort of made it accessible to the everyday man, rather than being a thing where you would only get access to it by being born into it, or if it's part of your culture or something like that.
So they streamlined it.
It's inherently extremely experimental in the early days. You know, the idea that now you can pick a spell and you know what school it belongs to, and you know what to read so you can learn it, and you know how to use it safely. You know, like, we think about the fact that your character may cast a fireball, but just casting a fireball that's not going to explode and kill you and everyone around you and things like that it's not an easy thing that we just all, like, human mortals, have always known. It took a lot of experimentation, and that's why you had these specific groups who would kind of just put their elite, their intelligentsia into furthering pushing the boundaries and discovering more so that more people could use it.
Even that, we talked about it in, we did a Magic Explained, I think it might even be a year ago by now, or close to it, episode. We were going through the schools of magic and magic more fundamentally. But in that, we sort of talked about, too, that the Mages Guild is sort of what implements this kind of ideas of schools of magic and creates divisions of different magic types, so, you know, to help structure learning and so on, rather than the earlier sort of, you can even see it in some of the writings and so on of the earlier first era ancient sort of cultures, and they sort of treat magic as kind of, it feels a little bit more like a philosophical kind of like study, or like it's in that realm of like mystical and miracle kind of vibe, whereas
it kind of reminds me of scientists in our own world. You know, when you go back into like earlier 1900s or even the mid, and scientists were often like philosophers as well, and they had this really like broad way of thinking about the world and trying to discover, you know, things about planets and space and all this kind of stuff. And then nowadays, you know, it's very like separated into like, I'm this type of scientist, and like, here are the different schools of science perhaps, and like, we don't really focus on philosophy as much. You can kind of see that with the Mages Guild in a way, that they obviously enhanced magic in the sense that they made it more accessible, and they made it safer by kind of giving you strict guidelines on, this is how you cast this spell, it belongs to this school, here's how to learn it, and so on. But at the cost, there's like a rigidity cost, you know, like it's much more rigid. There's less experimentation, unless you're some kind of high level wizard who goes out and experiments on your own. But as far as like the lower tier mages go, it's very like, by the books, this is how you do it.
Yeah, regulated.
And regulated as well on top of it, in terms of just laws, as in, for example, you're not allowed to do necromancy in some contexts.
Trying to define and categorize magic is kind of fruitless at the end of the day, because when the mortal realm is created, you've got these gods that devote their power to creating the earth bones, to creating laws of physics and nature, to make things make sense. But when you have Magnus and the Magna-Gi fleeing from this world and tearing rifts in the sky, that allows the magic to seep through from Aetherius completely uncontrolled. It's a completely uncontrollable substance that really you can use in any way if you're willing to experiment with it. So when you have the Mages Guild come along, try to make it accessible to everyone, try to make it safe for as many people as possible, you kind of have to try and enforce boundaries that don't really exist. And I think it's one of the reasons why the Psijic, who are very secretive about what they do, they're very much in line with mysticism. And mysticism is kind of gets forgotten about a bit, but it's like using magic to kind of understand and change magic. So it's a form of magic that kind of inherently goes against what the Mages Guild is all about.
You can look to, I guess for people too, if you look at the lore and then you look at the gameplay, you can see the discrepancies between the two, and we say this all the time. But schools of magic are really there for a big part, is to divide up your skills and to keep them in nice different categories. And that's why it can also shift and change through the different games and so on. Because it's like, what does Telvanni mushroom tower growing fall into in terms of magic, or like, what does starlight magic actually constitute? Like, you could, if it's an offensive spell, they might put it in destruction, but then, if it's candlelight, then they'll put it in alteration. You see what I mean? Like, if you really in your head,
I'm pretty sure sun damage is in restoration, isn't it? Or am
I
wrong?
You're right. Yeah. So it's like, if you just always keep at the back of your mind that these divisions are largely there for gameplay, and then even if you're bringing a lore context into it, you can just treat them as sort of like arbitrary, like academic divisions of, encompassing different topics or specialities. But
yeah. I think a really interesting thing, this is a bit random, but I had a memory from Oblivion which made me think of the kind of restrictions with magic, because as we'll talk about, there was a necromancy restrictions, right, which was quite controversial when that all happened. However, you can see through the quest, I think it's called Fingers of the Mountain. I know that's what the spell in the book is called. But that's an example in Oblivion where a destruction spell is kind of just like banned, or it's not really meant to be there. And there's this high elf, her name is Irana, and she's been kicked out of the guild before, and the guild leader there kind of thinks like, oh, she's a scavenger, she's got no respect for the power of the arcane arts, whereas to her, she just thinks he's a bit of a control freak and try to control all the power he can. But if you help her, you actually get this secret kind of like spell tome, and you learn how to cast this crazy strong destruction spell, which just does shock damage in an area radius, and it's really powerful. But it just makes me think of how, you can imagine them like nerfing a lot of things, like, oh no, you can't have that spell because it's just too strong.
Well, like that's kind of thing too. I feel like a lot of the Mages Guild storylines, and if you look at it all, and especially from a lore perspective too, it's this constant balance of like, its initial purpose was to enlighten the public, deliver magical services, to enhance, public life, and it's good for everyone, when you can get a potion to cure X disease or whatever. But then also restricting those powers and regulating them because they can be crazy and get out of control. Like, think about it. Like, imagine right now if all of a sudden people could go to a school and learn magic, and how wild and crazy that could be if people can all of a sudden just learn, commoners could go in, and if they're intelligent enough, they could learn to fling fireballs or summon demons, from Oblivion into your realm. Like, it's dangerous stuff, and it has a lot of ramifications if it's not.
Mm-hmm. There's really no barrier for entry. I mean, just trying to get into the College of Winterhold is a good example of how little you actually need to do to pretty much get the trust of everyone.
I do feel like that one, though, I would say, is probably... I do lean in a little bit more towards a gameplay thing. Like, back in the day, remember, like, the guilds had, especially in Morrowind time, they had skill restrictions and stuff like that. And Oblivion, you had to do all of that stuff before you could get to the Arcane University and sort of prove yourself.
You had to get a recommendation from every single guild hall first, which was cool. Just going back to what I was saying about that quest, I actually found the quote about the Finger of the Mountain book that the Argonian wizard of the Mages Guild talks about. He goes, not only does it exist, but she knows where it is. Well, this is unacceptable. That book needs to be in the safekeeping of the guild. I trust that as a member of the guild, you would do the right thing and acquire this text before Irana does. Are we clear? And like, you know what I mean? You can literally then go to the Arcane University and make a more powerful spell that does the same thing at a more efficient magicka cost. And nobody bats an eye. But I think that's more of like a gameplay thing. I think in the lore, the Finger of the Mountain spells supposed to be super dangerous.
You could even interpret, and I don't know how, like, you know how to use the spell making services, you need to pay gold and so on. And I feel like that's another, there's another way that they actually use. And I mean, to be honest, it is.
They just want your money. You can't have that book for free.
Well, magic kind of becomes somewhat commodified, like to get access to the training, to learn new spells, to be able to, spell making, enchanting services, all of these things. But a way to limit people's access to that is by, financial means, so that not just anyone with a, sum of money can just make some destruction spell.
Vanus Galerion would be rolling in his grave.
He's an enterprise. He is like the Jeff Bezos of magic.
No, he's not.
Well, he's not.
Like, that's not what he wanted.
It's not what he wanted, but it's just funny to say.
Plus, we don't know Bezos' stance on necromancy either, so we can't really be making assumptions.
I'm sure it would just be whatever's the most efficient. But
but I mean, that is kind of a foundational, almost a bit of a contradiction, with Vanus Galerion, is that there's kind of two reasons why he wanted to establish the Mages Guild, because him and Manamako were both like excellent students in the Psijic Order, and the Psijics are generally speaking more than happy to allow any kind of study if you're kind of furthering magic and you're not being too irresponsible. So they weren't really cracking down on Manamako for what he was getting up to. So Vanus Galerion then decides, because he knows someone who's being extremely irresponsible with magic, decides to make it much more accessible to a much wider range of people. And I understand that partially that's because he doesn't think a select few should be the arbiters of how magic is used.
Two, it's also like his way into the Psijic Order. Like he started off like in a really low class. Like he basically, there was a lot of chance really that got him into the Psijic Order to begin with, and so he naturally would sympathize with other people. He was part of Somerset Isle's sort of strict class system where you're the serfs.
His name was Trectus.
Yeah,
Trectus. He was like basically like a serf on the estate of some small noble.
Yeah. And basically, and got to Psijic Order, and like you were saying, Manamako and he became the stellar students and so on. But, Manamako took a darker path, but then, so he had disagreements with the rest of the Psijic Order for different reasons, but Vanus didn't like how exclusive and hidden away the Psijic Order were. Even if you look at the Psijic Order, they have like some complex system of how they pick their people. It's like not understood and so on. But because the Psijic Order too, by the way, they're called monks for a reason. They are a religious organization. At the end of the day, they are the preservers of the old ways, which is what the Oldma traditionally believed before the Ultima turned over to this sort of, we're only going to worship the ancestors of our betters. So the classic sort of like, Oriel, Trinimac, and just these divines. And that's when you get this highly structured society. But that's why the Psijic Order broke off. It's also why, Prophet Veloth and other, there was plenty of schisms for similar reasons. But so the Psijic Order do have a sort of cultural or religious element to their magical study and so on. They're about managing the world and making sure peace is kept and
the
equity.
The old ways are quite interesting because it's another term used to refer to mysticism in general. The old ways, which is interesting if you were to consider it more of like a spiritual or religious type of magic. But I find it quite interesting that if you investigate centaurs, which we haven't seen in a while, they featured in Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall though. They're said to be like this still true followers of the old ways, which I just find super interesting.
A nice little connection there. Kind of like, to me, I can kind of interpret that as like a sort of like a tying them back to a sort of like ancient Elnafey kind of thing in the initial, because you would imagine that the Oldma are pretty close, I guess, to the old.
What if
Elnafey.
it's just a Psijic experiment gone wrong?
Maybe.
They turn themselves into half horse beasts.
The other thing too, bringing up mysticism there, and obviously it's not a skill in Skyrim, but in previous games it was. But mysticism had a lot to do with the manipulation, like you're saying, of magic itself, but also of like souls, and that's where Manamako went down a dark path, and that's why I've sort of said before that it makes so much more sense that necromancy is intertwined with mysticism to me, because of this manipulation of souls that exist already, and that's kind of where it kind of starts. Like conjuration's more about conjuring things from planes of oblivion and so on. But anyway, that aside, you can see how that how the progression went along, and that's when you sort of get, in ways you could argue that Manamako, there are some sources that call him the first lich, but then there are obviously Aelid liches that are much older. The dragon priests are also another type of lich, kind of. So the magic's been around, but I guess he's a big pioneer of necromancy, and you could probably argue that Manamako is what released it to the populace in the same way that Vanus Galerion released it to, through the Mages Guild magic to populace, because of all of these people now that can learn magic or dip their toes into it. Necromancy now sort of becomes an option, and then perhaps...
Elder Scrolls Online... Sorry, I was going to say, Elder Scrolls Online made Manamako's descent into studying necromancy really cheesy, though. I remember doing this whole quest walkthrough for when I was doing the video on flesh magic, and you see old when they show the projections, like the magic projections, and you see him talking, and it ends up getting very mwahahaha type. I am going to be evil.
It's interesting to think that what mostly Manamako, but also Vanus did in deciding to kind of take their knowledge and spread it to the rest of Tamriel, how that might have made the menace of necromancy way worse. Because while the Psijics, I'm fairly sure they've said that they're not really for it. The idea that they could experiment with necromancy in the solitude of the Isle of Artaeum, keep it there, and just kind of understand it as a form of mysticism better, it is kind of safe practice, because the Psijic have this idea that they don't really want to intervene with the goings-on of Tamriel. They have this word called Egnafir, which means bad change. They don't want bad change to happen, so when they get involved, it's only when it's necessary. Whereas the Mages Guild and, obviously the Black Worm cult are much more ingrained in Tamrielic society, and the Mages Guild go as far as to get involved with counter-invasions of Daedric realms and things like that. It's very political, and so political, in fact, that Vanus Galerion would come to resent it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to think that necromancy might not have been such a big deal if they'd kept it inside their secluded institution.
Or what if by outlawing it in the Mages Guild, it just made it more juicy and made people want to do it?
Well, that's kind of what happens when you get to this story of Oblivion. Mages Guild with necromancy, there's kind of been it's not necessarily encouraged, but it wasn't straight out illegal. It was
at one point it was banned by the guild, but they just turned a blind eye to it.
It's kind of soft. Basically, they've always had a nebulous relationship with it. However, when we get to the story of Oblivion, Hannibal Traven, who was the archmage at the time, he takes a staunch role against it. And it's necromancy's absolutely outlawed and so on. And that kind of divides the council a fair bit. And you actually get members, funnily enough, because of that harsh regulation, you get a lot of those members fleeing to the Order of the Black Worm, so where they can practice necromancy, and it actually, helps Manamako's ranks grow, and that's why you play through Oblivion. Manamako's the main enemy, and you've got necromancers versus Mages Guild essentially. But
it's like decriminalizing something bad. It's even in the College of Winterhold, right? People can do necromancy, and because it's it's allowed, it's just it's just whatever. There's no super dark, twisted connotation to it like there is when you play Oblivion. You can't even get reanimation spells, which makes it all the more cool when you do get the staff. After killing Manamako, the staff of worms.
That's the thing. Is it could theoretically be done responsibly. Just to kind of use an example, if doctors are doing an autopsy on a body for whatever reason, it's different to people having a cult where they dig up dead bodies and cut them open. You know what I mean? It's if you kind of allow this study, which perhaps Manamako, maybe that would have been all he was interested in, is kind of understanding the nature of magic in mortals. I don't know. Too much credit
He's
here.
a bit of a naughty boy.
But you know what I mean? That theoretically, if it's not outlawed and made this taboo thing, then maybe it could have been done responsibly.
I guess if it's consensual, then it could be okay. Like, you know, the Dark Elves, they bring back ancestor spirits to advise them or to give updates to, and the ancestor spirits happy to go through whatever unpleasant pain is associated with coming back into the mortal world. Because they love their family. You could have a similar thing like donating your body for science, but it's for magic. But I guess the way you could do it, the reason it's immoral is because it causes pain, because you start messing with souls and spirits of the deceased and the cycle of life and death and their journey to the afterlife and all that kind of stuff, right? There is this text which I don't like, but, you know, you could say it's a different way of reanimating a body or a skeleton or whatever, but they talk about infusing it with a minor Daedric essence when doing necromancy. And I suppose if someone chose to donate their body, then their spirit has already gone to the afterlife, and then the physical body was reanimated for research purposes using some kind of Daedric essence, then perhaps that would pass the morality test in Tamriel.
Arguably, that could probably fall in line more with conjuration, because it is about summoning a Daedric essence to inhabit a body.
Well, this is the thing. It's all just whatever categories, you know. When does it become necromancy and when is it conjuration?
Yeah.
Like, for example, soul trapping a mortal soul into a soul gem is kind of like conjuration, but it's... I mean, you can soul trap in Oblivion, actually.
Yeah, it's mysticism in that.
And it's chill. But arguably, that's still pretty bad if you trap someone's soul in a
in our real world, how with every like new or big stride in technology, there's lots of like moral implications and discussions to be had. Like, imagine that on steroids, because it's magic and its applications are so vast and there's so many different ways of doing things, and that's what makes the Mages Guild job like super hard, like trying to manage all that. But interesting, like when we're talking about like the first era by comparison, do you know what, if you actually play Skyrim is probably a little bit more of a closer feeling to what first era because they only have one. There's the College of Winterhold, which is your one sort of, you know, your Mages Guild, but they're very isolated, scorned. And then if you look at where is your other sources of magics beside, like, you know, crazy necromancers off on the side, or like, you know, hedge wizards or something like that. Instead, you'll have court wizards, which are usually from the college anyway, but they're just basically a wizard to help the Jarl. So
they feel like that Clever Men vibe almost, in a way.
Yeah, so you actually see a place where magic is far less... it does seem in Skyrim that it's less everyday by comparison to when you go around the towns in Oblivion, and it feels
it's totally different feel. And I mean, even the advantages, like, this is the thing that ended up happening when the Mages Guild was made. Originally, there was a lot of protest, and, you know, all kinds of different individuals were against it. But what people realized was that having a Mages Guild in your city actually brought a lot of benefit. You know, it's like... Imagine you have you choose to let a bunch of computer geeks set up shop, and then every time your PC breaks, you're kind of like, well, you're the city computer guild, fix my PC, please. So there's benefits. It's like they would help with anything relating to the arcane. If some necromancer was out the city, they could investigate it. They could have potions and things for people in the city to use if necessary. I'm not saying it's free, like they just give the city whatever it wants. But you know, they were there and beneficial in many ways.
Yeah, great advantage. Imagine a plague comes through, and then you've got healers that can help you out, or like, you know, anything. Like, healing's just a massive thing. So you've got like soldiers who are wounded come back and get healing or something.
Because it would just be the priests before, I assume. Like the chapel, you'd have priests there that know some restoration magic, but it's a whole different ball game when you've got, you know, 8 different mages who can cast fireballs, even just as a extra defense in case of invasion or anything like that. Of course, on the flip side, there's the whole idea that as being part of the Mages Guild with certain enemies, you can bring hardship upon the town. I mean, for example, look at the Bruma Mages Guild being burnt down in the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. That would be quite scary if you lived in Bruma, and you'd be like, oh, these damn mages bringing trouble to our city. You know, or even like experiments going wrong. Like look at the College of Winterhold and the whole idea that they caused the collapse there. Yeah. That people, you know, theorized that it was their fault. I mean, that's that's a bad look. And you can imagine those kinds of vibes on a smaller scale existing in different cities where the Mages Guild was.
And I mean, almost all the major things that go wrong on Tamriel can be tied to magic in some way. Obviously, you've got the kind of Daedric invasions, which will get to the ramifications of the Oblivion crisis, but even things like the Thracian Plague, which wipes out half the population. The idea is that the Slode were working with necromantic rituals to conjure this unnatural disease. So really, it makes sense for people to be very skeptical, especially those who don't understand it themselves.
It's funny. I was thinking recently, it's like Skyrim, the fourth era actually has some very interesting sort of like, I kind of like that their magic has kind of gone down in terms of its like public availability or usage, because then it becomes a little bit more like interesting and like hidden wizards and towers and that kind of thing. But I guess we'll probably naturally get to it. But like you just said, the Oblivion crisis had massive ramifications for how people treat magic, because now they saw demons popping out of portals outside their towns, slaughtering their families and so on. So now people are really skeptical of this kind of stuff and quite scared. And remember, they also got saved by some like holy god, Akatosh, avatar of Akatosh through Martin Septim. Like, these are kinds of like cultural sort of religious things they understand, not this sort of, evil necromancy or conjuration or so on. And that actually leads to the dissolution of the Mages Guild, which then later splits into two organizations who vie for the Elder Council's, prestige or whatever. They're basically the Synod Mages and the College of Whispers. We haven't got a whole lot on them. I don't know if you guys want to.
Well, what
talk.
is interesting about them is that it seems to be a recurring theme when it comes to studying magic, but the significant difference between the two is their opinions on necromancy. Because you've got the Synod, who are like very staunchly anti-necromancy, and the College of Whispers are more willing to study it. So it seems to always be a dividing line between...
It seems like the College of Whispers are the more kind of open group who would talk to Daedra and do things like that. And I mean, I don't know how canon this is, but I imagine the Synod are more like heavy into like field research. I mean, just what we've seen with different quests and finding powerful artifacts and studying, things like the Eye of Magnus. That's their way that they would acquire new knowledge and information, whereas you get the impression the College of Whispers would just summon a Daedra and say, hey, how does this work? I do some ritual to bind you, to force you to tell me, or something like that.
Yeah. Another thing real quick too, to actually just add to the skepticism of magic, but the Great War and fighting the elves or using magic and so on would have put in most of the provinces that are inhabited by man would be quite skeptical, because some of them already were, like Hammerfell and Skyrim are already quite skeptical of magic as it was. So, and especially they, and that's been, to be honest, that's been a long cultural thing where they've sort of paired elves and magic, and that's why we don't like the elves, because they'll use their devious magics and stuff like that,
When you've got people like Lord Narafin who are kind of working alongside Daedra at the same time.
Yeah. But, yeah.
I mean, even the Daedra coming out of the Oblivion Gates, they use magic too. So you wouldn't be fond of seeing wizards cast fireball spells when you can remember Dremora casting them at you, nor would you be fond of them summoning the creatures that you saw pour out of Oblivion Gates. Like, you don't summon a scamp. I saw a scamp, come and try and kill people that I care about. All that kind of stuff would just make magic extremely unpopular. I can't think of any type of magic.
If you're just the common man or woman working the fields and all you understand is, kind of whack and smash and things, you're not really going to appreciate magic, especially when there's gates opening up on your land.
And even the other types of magic that aren't really related to Daedra, but like illusion. Who wants that around as a non-magic user? I don't want someone to come up to me and make me like them or feel a certain way because of a spell. It's weird.
Yeah, in terms of like the Mages Guild, it's funny to consider this, because this is like putting a lot of like, a lot of thought into it, but like in terms of regulating things, even like invasion of privacy and stuff like that, or like any mind manipulation stuff, like you're saying, is way over the top. Or but even being invisibility and sneaking into some bathrooms or something, like it's a bit,
it's weird. Yeah, it's weird.
No one
Isn't
would
that
do
worse
that.
though? I mean, there are no bathrooms plot twists, so that's why it's okay. But isn't that kind of worse in a way? I know this sounds really weird, but what would you rather? People have the ability to summon a Daedric creature, which essentially, just hear me out, is just a different manifestation of raw power, right? Like, why is that different to someone casting electric bolts or fireballs, right? It's something that will do physical or elemental damage and kill you, right? Whereas illusion can be really used to do some bad things. Like, think of the political manipulation and all this kind of things that could literally, change the timeline in hugely significant ways. I mean, look at the way
Like
that
Jaeger Fan, right?
yeah, or like look at the way that Veamina was trying to influence King Emmerich in the Elder Scrolls Online with these nightmares and trick him into making decisions that would make the Covenant fall apart. Like, illusion is arguably just as bad.
arguably
right?
though.
Jaeger Fan poses as the Emperor and traps the Emperor in a pocket realm of Oblivion as well. So it definitely has dastardly potential.
But an interesting thing there to consider too is that magic is a fact of the makeup of Tamriel. There is no real like extinguishing it. So it's kind of, I guess they might argue that through the Mages Guild, you can regulate this stuff that already exists, as opposed to just leaving it to the whims of people who have no sort of vested interest in the good of society, or crazy Daedric princes.
Fine, but arguably making it more accessible is what made the problem, right? Like, even if it was super elitist and in the hands of the few, those few didn't tend to run around the streets casting frenzy or charm spells on people.
Well, that's why the Sigics were so staunch about keeping to themselves and only intervening when it felt like they really had to,
Yeah.
Whereas nowadays, that's not really going to be a thing.
Yeah.
So if you, it's kind of like, it's like the benefits and problems of anything democratic where a lot of people can be involved. It's like if you have a select few, it's much easier to kind of choose the results of like how things happen. But if everybody's involved, then you can't really regulate it no matter how much you try.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see if there was any like post Mages Guilds kind of stuff, like black market books and stuff and spell tomes, like a whole, like, you know what I mean, like that all happening. But yeah, I feel like it's hard to kind of say whether it's good or not, because the other thing is too, there's going to be Daedric princes, there's going to be other things with like, large capacities for magic, and Mages Guild arguably allows common people to, fight against it or to ward themselves against it more often, when you've got, rather than being like, a local necromancer, you've actually got people who understand magic and can help work against it. Or when you've got powerful organizations like House Telvanni, and what are you going to do? Like, the Mages Guild provides a nice balance to that, rather than being walked all over by wizard lords who they're going to do what they're going to do. They don't care.
Agree.
Whereas you're better off, having some sort of,
I can totally understand it. It's pros and cons.
It's an exact parallel to a certain thing that's in America. Like there are certain things where it's like you can either have only a couple of people can access this thing, or everyone can access it, and you get the benefits and negatives associated with that. That's how it feels.
there are trade-offs.
Yeah. I will tell you though,
cons.
thematically, I do actually enjoy the sort of more hidden magic, or the way Skyrim sort of handles it a little bit more. I appreciate I still want that school feeling. I feel like if the College of Winterhold, for example, was as done as well as, like, say, the Arcane University or something, if it was like one location that was like that, I feel like that would have been perfect, in the way that there's this one central location. Everyone's still like, ooh, I don't know if I like it. I like the sort of like scared of magic kind of attitude. But I do like Guildhall feelings being everywhere. Like, I appreciate the feeling, but I do like, from a lore perspective, I'm always more interested in the first era, when there's just like, different culture groups of magic, or when magic feels magical, less academic.
Hammerfell could be a really good place for that.
Yeah.
Because Hammerfell, like, Redguards have often been quite distrustful of magic. They particularly don't, like, there's been different periods of time where they're more accepting, but generally speaking, they don't like conjuration and they absolutely hate necromancy. So much so that they dislike a group called the Ashabar who hunt the undead and hunt down necromancers who are a threat to Redguard society. So even though they're helping, they're kind of like, ooh, like you're just involved with something that, you know, is involved with the corrupting of life and death.
Yeah, I think if it's in Hammerfell, we're going to get a similar sort of College of Winterhold situation, with not in terms of like quality or anything, but there's going to be a very specific group in sort of one location that is like your...
Which does exist in Ellenhere, I think. That's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
city of mages in Hammerfell.
Yeah, I know in our ideal Hammerfell we made a sort of
Circle of
Magi or something like that. And
Go check out our ideal Hammerfell video. You'll like it. And also check out my centaurs video I mentioned earlier. It's a whole video on centaurs.
Yeah, I think one thing I tend to prefer in the games anyway is like more attention to each guild. And you can give them, you know, College of Winterhold in a way does have, the problem is it's poorly executed, but it does have a little bit more identity, even just because of its location, and like people sort of talk about it, like, you know, Fallions from there and different court wizards have been there. It kind of gives it sort of like a bit of prestige to it. It's like, oh, there's this one place, whereas the Mages Guild, I know it did have it with the Arcane University, but a lot of times a bit more spread when it's just guild halls. I hope in a way by having like your job themed factions, like your Fighters Guild equivalent, Mages Guild equivalent, or whatever, having them as like one location and sort of culturally relevant and interesting, it gives you a little bit more room to explore some of the political sort of factions of other areas and stuff, and making, which I would prefer be a focus. I think.
Having the Mages Guild around though, it did add a lot of really interesting characters and cool memories, because each leader had their own way of running things in their guild hall, and like a different vibe, a different personality to the place.
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember in Cheydinhall, the guy who was secretly a necromancer was the leader there. And like, you can just remember different stories from different places.
It's corny, but I do hope in Hammerfell with mages, they go and lean into the sort of like, you know, sort of genie magic carpety kind of like, so like, you know, it goes to the lantern, the aesthetic and the look of it and so on. Like, I think it would be cool if they lean into that sort of, you know, Tales of
something
Tales
unique
of Arabia,
and not,
Arabian Nights. What? Oh my God! It's the famous thing of tales. It's the
I think you got it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you're making me doubt myself.
Yeah.
now.
Hold on.
But yeah. I mean, you do actually. I was just playing through
Tales of the Arabian Nights. Yes.
Yeah, so you don't want
get
it
a
to
little
feel
bit
like
of that
Hogwarts.
vibe in. You get a little bit of that vibe in Fargrave, the new place in ESO. It's very like kind of Twilight Desert with kind of all of that aesthetic there. But it could be done really well for Hammerfell.
Yeah,
for sure.
I'm still so pro Hammerfell over High Rock, if it's got to be one of them. Just because I really do want something that's got the best chance for being a province that feels more alien. If it's High Rock, it's gonna feel like some kind of majority, some sort of amalgamation of Skyrim, Cyrodiil kind of thing. It's gonna feel like that. Whereas we haven't had anything really alien as a mainline Elder Scrolls game since Morrowind. It would be good to see.
Does it ever just hit you that we're actually getting an Elder Scrolls 6? I don't know why. It's such a concept, but then I was just sitting there and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm imagining I've just started the game and I'm on the map.
Yeah.
And I open up the map and I can see like places. I don't know. It's just like
I'm gonna
making it real in my head.
I refuse to believe it.
There's
you know, like, as I seen news recently that NASA is shooting a missile into a
Asteroid
meteor
or something.
into an asteroid to avoid it hitting Earth. It's like something like that's going to happen before we ever get an Elder Scrolls 6, bro. Let's be real. Bardal's coming down to make sure it'll just land directly on their offices and make sure that we never get the bloody game.
I'm good. And when the first teaser trailer hits, I'm going to be so nostalgic. I can still watch the Skyrim trailers, like all of them, and just feel the same feelings that I felt when I first saw them as a kid.
It's sad
remember
because I
watching
can
that.
feel that with Cyberpunk too. I mean, we won't get off topic, but I heard the music yesterday and it took me back to this split-second reality where my anticipations weren't ruined yet. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to be a really good game. And I'm like, no.
I remember like there was a demo where Todd was just on stage showing off a tiny little bit of Skyrim, and then the character like just walks slightly into the water and it leaves a ripple, and everyone's like, "Oh,
Yeah,
my God, this is amazing."
Yeah.
I remember that.
Oh man. So
anything else to say about the Mages Guild? I can definitely say the whole crisis with Umbriel didn't help too, on top of, I don't think we mentioned that, on top of the Oblivion crisis and you know, the distrust of magic in general and all things arcane.
yeah, I mean, like there's more like small details and stuff to go into, or the specifics. Like you could list off every rank that there is, but ultimately we like to in these episodes sort of discuss the bigger themes rather than look. You can read a wiki if you want to see the exact ranks and stuff, and like
The 6 Archmagisters.
But yeah, the most interesting thing to me about, I don't know about you guys, but the Mages Guild is really that sort of like balance of the sort of like regulation and commodification of magic, and also, you know, the dangers that come with it.
Yeah, it's the accessibility which is really interesting.
It's crazy to think too, Riemann Empire, like during the reign of Riemann, it wasn't even around yet, because it was Second Empire in the Second Era, but it was the Potentate's continuation of it, and that's when the guilds came in. So, you know, even in the time of Riemann, or even when the Thracian Plague, all of that, there's no Mages Guild back then. There's no Mages Guild, you know. I mean, of course, there's no Mages Guild when you go back as far as the Aelid times and stuff like that in the First Era. But
Yeah, I mean, it's a Second Era thing.
yeah,
So
I guess you could briefly mention that they kind of have their militant sect as well in the Order of the Lamp.
Oh yeah,
the Lamp Knights. In that, like when you've got groups like the Sigics, because you can't really, Artaeum exists, but it also kind of doesn't exist at the same time. They can move the entire island. They can all just go incorporeal, whereas the Mages Guild is much more, as we kind of hit on before, it's accessible and it's easy to attack if you're an enemy of the Mages Guild. So they kind of need their militant group.
especially early days, setting it all up, having a group of kind of knights, like the Lamp Knights, you know, basically hired guards, so that if the Mages Guild is traveling through dangerous areas, you've got some beefy defense. Especially if you've got some noobs that don't actually know a whole lot about magic yet, but they're walking around in wizard robes. You're kind of a bit of a target.
The other thing that's really cool too, is how it's kind of affected the actual Imperial Legions and stuff, and how the Imperial Battle Mages became such a big part. And, you know, it's really cool when you go to the Arcane University and there's like the hooded Imperial Legion sort of battle mages and so on. But it's interesting how even that magic has been used to reinforce their military. And it was a big part of Tiber Septim's campaigns, and you know, and the Zurin Arctus, the Imperial Battle Mage, and so on. But there's plenty of mentions of the Imperial Battle Mages and their usefulness in their campaigns of conquest. And
There's also a Mages Guild in Whiterun in Elder Scrolls Arena. How about that?
But yeah, I think that's about it on Mages Guild, right? Anyone else got anything else
I'd say so.
to add on to? Yeah, I feel like it's a pretty straightforward. One thing they've got to bring back for Elder Scrolls 6, and this is what Oblivion did have, is the spell making, or some capacity of like customization, because it really is a problem for at least destruction. But if you want to be a spell slinging sort of mage long term, the damage scaling just isn't there for in vanilla Skyrim. Like you can do it, but it's just not as optimal, especially because it just burns through your magicka. Like you can cheese it with like, you know, zero cost enchanting and stuff like that. But
That's basically the only way to to have a mage character long term who doesn't feel a bit.
And then you have things like Alteration that has so many like passives with a 30% spell absorb and 30% magic resistance, and then also like Ebony Flesh or Dragonhide and stuff. It's just
Dude,
so
you can
powerful.
go into Alteration just for perks.
Yeah.
You don't even need to use the spells in your playstyle at the end of it.
Yeah.
If you don't want to.
Yeah, it's really...
But they need to bring back all the utility spells as well. I remember when there were spells to open doors and all that stuff. I just need like heaps more variety.
Vanilla Skyrim's magic is something to long for. Visually, there's a lot of cool visuals, and they actually did like change it up rather than it just being the same like lightning animation or same frost thing, like, you know, Icy Spear, Icy Whirlwind, or the Incinerate, or you've got the area ones. But like, give us some customizability over that, but also, like you're saying, like utility stuff. Like I can understand why, because arguably like a mage can kind of just do everything if they could just lockpick through everything and so on. But the easy way to do it is like only have a lock spell that goes up to expert, and then there's no master spell. You've actually got to be a master lockpick to actually do master or something. You know what I mean? But
doesn't Hannibal? This is a bit random. I was wrong. Hannibal Traven, he basically offs himself with a ring. I think it's the ring of immolation, right?
Yeah, that's right. What's the reason he does it again? I can't remember why.
He puts so you can be Archmage.
No, but what's the? Yeah, there is, but there's a reason as to why he did it specifically. Like there was a plot reason. It was going to give you some advantage, I think, to help Manamarco or something, or maybe was his soul go into the Black Grand Soul Gem or something, which was going to be used to.
Wait, immolation is a word, right?
Maybe he's just about to do it, and then your character's like, wait, you really don't need to. It's and then he's like, oh,
no, I
he's like, I can't stop now.
Yeah, this is really weird. Search results returning absolutely nothing on Ring of Immolation. That's what I remember it being called.
Yeah.
He puts it on, and it's a ring that does fire damage on self.
There's a cover-up.
Yeah.
And then he just basically gets burnt to death. That's really weird.
I just got reminded there. While you're like still looking for that, in the anniversary edition, obviously all the Creation Club stuff, they did add back the Staff of Worms, and they also add the Bloodworm Helm and the Helm of Urin Bloodclaw. But Urin, is it Bloodclaw? I can't. Bearclaw. Yeah. What was I thinking? Yeah, I was thinking Bloodworm Helm. But yeah, the Bloodworm Helm, it's like made out of what you imagine is like this Bloodworm Helm look. Like the look of it in the Skyrim stuff is really, really cool in the Creation Club thing. Like, yeah, it's just a cool piece of gear there. And it makes your conjuration spells.
He trapped his soul in the soul gem so that you could use it to protect against Manamarco's
right,
magic.
that's right. I thought there was some reason. It wasn't just like, oh, we're going to make room for the Archmage. But yeah.
It's so weird that I can't find it, though, like the item page online.
He definitely does it because I would like...
No, I know he does it. I swear he does it.
Yeah, because it was... I feel like there's like easier ways to die than like putting a ring if it, sets you on fire.
Nothing is showing anything. I've got Oblivion, Traven Ring. I've got Ring of Immolation, Oblivion, nothing.
Yeah. Well,
maybe he didn't.
Mandela effect.
Never happened. All right. Anyway, I suppose that is everything we have to say today about the Mages Guild. Thank you everyone for tuning in. As always, social media links in the description, as is a link to our Patreon and merch if you want to support the channel. And we look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.